The Mahabharata is an ancient Indian epic where the main story revolves around two branches of a family, the Pandavas and Kauravas, who, in the Kurukshetra War, battle for the throne of Hastinapura. Interwoven into this narrative are several smaller stories about people dead or living, and philosophical discourses. Krkshetla, himself a character in the epic, composed it, as, according to tradition, he dictated the verses and Ganesha wrote them down. At 100,000 verses, it is the longest epic poem ever written, generally thought to have been composed in the 4th century BCE or earlier. The events in the epic play out in the Indian subcontinent and surrounding areas. It was first narrated by a student of Vyasa at a snake sacrifice of the great-grandson of one of the major characters of the story. Including within it the Bhagavad Gita, the Mahabharata is one of the most important texts of ancient Indian, indeed world, literature. The Prelude. Shantanu, the king of Hastinapur, was married to Ganga with whom he had a son called Devavrat. Several years later, when Devavrat had grown up to be an accomplished prince, Shantanu fell in love with Satyavati. Her father refused to let her marry the king unless the king promised that Satyavati's son and descendants would inherit the throne. Unwilling to deny Devavrat his rights, Shantanu declined to do so, but the prince, on coming to know of the matter, rode over to Satyavati's house, vowed to renounce the throne and to remain celibate throughout his life. The prince then took Satyavati home to the palace so that the king, his father, could marry her. On account of the terrible vow that he'd taken that day, Devavrat came to be known as Bhishma. Shantanu was so pleased with his son that he granted to Devavrat the boon of choosing the time of his own death. In time, Shantanu and Satyavati had 2 sons. Soon thereafter, Shantanu died. Satyavati's sons still being minors, the affairs of the kingdom were managed by Bhishma and Satyavati. By the time these sons reached adulthood, the elder one had died in a skirmish with some Gandharvas, heavenly beings, so the younger son, Vichitravirya, was enthroned. Bhishma then abducted the 3 princesses of a neighboring kingdom and brought them over to Hastinapur to be wedded to Vichitravirya. The eldest of these princesses declared that she was in love with someone else, so she was let go. The 2 other princesses were married to Vichitravirya, who died soon afterwards, childless. Dhritarashtra, Pandu and Vidur. So that the family line did not die out, Satyavati summoned her son Vyasa to impregnate the 2 queens. Vyasa had been born to Satyavati of a great sage named Parashar before her marriage to Shantanu. According to the laws of the day, a child born to an unwed mother was taken to be a stepchild of the mother's husband. By that token, Vyasa could be considered Shantanu's son and could be used to perpetuate the Kuru clan that ruled Hastinapur. Thus, by the Nayag custom, the 2 queens each had a son of Vyasa. To the elder queen was born a blind son called Dhritarashtra, and to the younger was born an otherwise healthy but extremely pale son called Pandu. To a maid of these queens was born a son of Vyasa called Vidur. Bhishma brought up these 3 boys with great care. Dhritarashtra grew up to be the strongest of all princes in the country. Pandu was extremely skilled in warfare and archery, and Vidur knew all the branches of learning, politics, and statesmanship. The first exile. Yudhishthir's being the crown prince and his rising popularity with the citizens was extremely distasteful to Duryodhana, who saw himself as the rightful heir since his father was the de facto king. He plotted to get rid of the Pandavas. This he did by getting his father to send the Pandavas and Kunti off to a nearby town on the pretext of a fair that was held there. The palace in which the Pandavas were to stay in that town was built by an agent of Duryodhana. The palace was made entirely of inflammable materials since the plan was to burn down the palace, together with the Pandavas and Kunti, once they'd settled in. The Pandavas, however, were alerted to this fact by their other uncle, Vidur, and had a counter-plan ready. They dug an escape tunnel underneath their chambers. One night, the Pandavas gave out a huge feast which all of the townsfolk came to. At that feast, a forest woman and her 5 sons found themselves so well fed and well drunk that they could no longer walk straight. They passed out on the floor of the hall. That very night, the Pandavas themselves set fire to the palace and escaped through the tunnel. When the flames had died down, the townsfolk discovered the bones of the forest woman and her boys, and mistook them for Kunti and the Pandavas. Duryodhana thought his plan had succeeded and that the world was free of the Pandavas. Arjuna and Draupadi. Meanwhile, the Pandavas and Kunti went into hiding, moving from one place to another and passing themselves off as a poor Brahmin family. They would seek shelter with some villager for a few weeks. The princes would go out daily to beg for food, return in the evenings and hand over the day's earnings to Kunti, who would divide the food into two. One half was for the strongman Bhim and the other half was shared by the others. During these wanderings, Bhim killed 2 demons, married a demoness, and had a demon child called Gatotkač. They then heard about a Swayamvar, a ceremony to choose a suitor, being organized for the princess of Panchal, and went at Panchal to see the festivities. According to their practice, they left their mother home and set out for alms. They reached the Swayamvar hall where the king was giving away things most lavishly to alms seekers. The brothers sat themselves down in the hall to watch the fun. The princess Draupadi, born of fire, was famed for her beauty, and every prince from every country for miles around had come to the Swayamvar, hoping to win her hand. The conditions of the Swayamvar were difficult. A long pole on the ground had a circular contraption spinning at its top. On this moving disc was attached a fish. At the bottom of the pole was a shallow urn of water. A person had to look down into this water mirror, use the bow and 5 arrows that were provided, and pierce the fish spinning on top. 5 attempts were allowed. The second exile. For this exile, the Pandavas left their aging mother Kunti behind at Hastinapur, in Vidur's place. They lived in forests, hunted game, and visited holy spots. At around this time, Yudhishthir asked Arjuna to go to the heavens in quest of celestial weapons because, by now, it was apparent that their kingdom would not be returned to them peacefully after the exile and that they would have to fight for it. Arjuna did so, and not only did he learn the techniques of several divine weapons from the gods, he also learnt how to sing and dance from the Gandharvas. After 12 years, the Pandavas went incognito for a year. During this 1-year period, they lived in the Virat kingdom. Yudhishthir took up employment as a king's counselor, Bhim worked in the royal kitchens, Arjuna turned himself into a eunuch and taught the palace maidens how to sing and dance, the twins worked at the royal stables, and Draupadi became a handmaiden to the queen. At the end of the incognito period, during which they were not discovered despite Duryodhana's best efforts, the Pandavas revealed themselves. The Virat king was overwhelmed. He offered his daughter in marriage to Arjuna, but he declined since he had been her dance teacher the past year and students were akin to children. The princess was married, instead, to Arjuna's son Abhimanyu. At this wedding ceremony, a large number of Pandava allies gathered to draw out a war strategy. Meanwhile, emissaries had been sent to Hastinapur to demand Indraprastha back, but the missions had failed. Krishna himself went on a peace mission and failed. Duryodhana refused to give away as much land as was covered by the point of a needle, let alone the 5 villages proposed by the peace missions. The Kauravas also gathered their allies around them, and even broke away a key Pandava ally, the maternal uncle of the Pandava twins, by trickery. War became inevitable. The Kurukshetra War and aftermath. Just before the war bugle was sounded, Arjuna saw arrayed before him his relatives, his great-grandfather Bhishma who had practically brought him up, his teachers Kripa and Drona, his brothers the Kauravas, and, for a moment, his resolution wavered. Krishna, the warrior par excellence, had given up arms for this war and had elected to be Arjuna's charioteer. To him Arjuna said, "Take me back, Krishna. I can't kill these people. They're my father, my brothers, my teachers, my uncles, my sons. What good is a kingdom that's gained at the cost of their lives?" Then followed a philosophical discourse that has today become a separate book on its own, the Bhagavad Gita. Krishna explained the impermanence of life to Arjuna, and the importance of doing one's duty and of sticking to the right path. Arjuna picked up his bow again. The battle raged for 18 days. The army totaled 18 Akshahinis, 7 on the Pandava side and 11 on the Kaurava, 21,870 chariots plus 21,870 elephants plus 65,610 horses plus 109,350 soldiers on foot. Casualties on both sides were high. When it all ended, the Pandavas had won the war but lost almost everyone they held dear. Duryodhana and all of the Kauravas had died, as had all of the menfolk of Draupadi's family, including all of her sons by the Pandavas. The now dead Karna was revealed to be a son of Kunti's from before her marriage to Pandu, and thus, the eldest Pandava and the rightful heir to the throne. The grand old man, Bhishma, lay dying. Their teacher Drona was dead, as were several kinsfolk related to them either by blood or by marriage. In about 18 days, the entire country lost almost 3 generations of its men. It was a war not seen on a scale before. It was the Great Indian War, the Mahabharata. After the war, Yudhishthir became king of Hastinapur and Indraprastha. The Pandavas ruled for 36 years, after which they abdicated in favor of Abhimanyu's son, Krkshetla. The Pandavas and Draupadi proceeded on foot to the Himalayas, intending to live out their last days climbing the slopes heavenwards. One by one, they fell on this last journey and their spirits ascended to the heavens. Years later, Krkshetla's son succeeded his father as king. He held a big sacrifice, at which this entire story was recited for the first time by a disciple of Vyasa called Vaishampayan. Legacy. Since that time, this story has been retold countless times, expanded upon, and retold again. The Mahabharata remains popular to this day in India. It has been adapted and recast in contemporary mode in several films and plays. Children continue to be named after the characters in the epic. The Bhagavad Gita is one of the holiest of Hindu scriptures. Beyond India, the Mahabharata story is popular in Southeast Asia in cultures that were influenced by Hinduism such as Indonesia and Malaysia.